One of the great resources we can use as documentary filmmakers is still imagery, including photographs, paintings, drawings, maps, diagrams, and so on. These are especially valuable for illustrating events that happened in the past, for which no motion pictures are available. But of course, we don't want our documentaries to end up feeling like slideshows, so it's really powerful to learn and develop techniques for integrating still images into motion picture projects in dynamic and creative ways. This tutorial will introduce you to several methods for doing that. When planning to add still images to a project, often the first question we need to answer is where to get them. If you're producing a film for an organization, you can ask them to share pictures with you from whatever archives they may have. Now, it's important to ask them to share the highest resolution pictures they have, because often people will send you images directly from their smartphones or social media sites, which may be highly compressed and aren't going to look good when blown up on a large screen. If you need to search for images yourself, the obvious place to start is with a Google image search. There are two important factors when doing this. One is copyright and the other image resolution. A lot of the image results you get here are copyrighted images, and they are simply not legal for you to use in any kind of film. The good news is that any images that come from 1923 or earlier are in the public domain and legal to use. In terms of resolution, what you want to do is go to Tools and Size and select Large. Google filters the search results to only give you fairly large size images. To check the image size and resolution, just go to the preview window, and here you can see the dimensions. Anything too much smaller than 1920 by 1080 is probably going to be problematic. To download, right-click on the preview image and go to Save Image As. If the file you end up with ends up being an odd type of file that is incompatible with Premiere, the workaround is to do a screen grab. An excellent source for legal images is Wikimedia Commons, which is a huge resource brought to us by the wonderful folks at Wikipedia. They do offer some videos and sounds, but the category we want is images. Here we have a search window, and here we have a bunch of images that I can choose from. I'm going to pick this nice profile. Here in the preview window, I have a button called More Details. And this gives me a lot of data about the photo, some of which I may need to write down or copy in order to properly credit this photo in my closing titles of my video. The main thing that I want is this link here that says Original File. This will give me the largest resolution, which is usually what I want. When I get to this page, I can right-click and go to Save Image As, and save it in the Assets folder for my project. Once I've gathered all my still images and other assets, I'm ready to start working here in Adobe Premiere. To import still images into Premiere, you use the same process as with video clips. I go to Import, and then I navigate to my assets on my hard drive and click Import, and the photograph comes in. Now, if you're just starting to edit your project in Premiere and you don't have a sequence yet, it's important to create the sequence so that it matches the properties of most of the assets you'll be using. This is one case where it would be a mistake to just grab this still photo, drag it onto the timeline to create a new sequence, because the sequence settings and the player now match the properties of the photo, and it's a very weirdly shaped player. And if I put some video now on the timeline, such as this, look at that. It's squozen inside of this very odd shaped player. So I'm going to undo and undo, get rid of this, and we want to choose the video instead to create the sequence. And now it's the proper shape and has the correct properties for a 16:9 film. And so now we can put the still photograph on the timeline and then resize it as needed. And there it is. It looks great, except for the fact that it has these great big black bars on the side. This is what we call pillar boxing. Maybe you're okay with this, but most video producers prefer not to have a lot of blank black space. So there are a number of alternatives. One common one is this. I'm holding down the Option key and dragging upwards, and now I have two versions of the clip, and I'm going to take the one on the bottom and increase the scale to fill the frame. But of course this looks pretty weird with this big head behind. So what people do then is go to Effects and Video Effects, Blur and Sharpen, Gaussian Blur, and then they blur out the background image. So it becomes just kind of an abstract shape. And it's kind of nice because it matches the photograph in color and it fills the space in a kind of abstract way. So that is one technique, but there are others. Another option would be to fill this background with some other sort of abstract kind of pattern, such as a stock photo of wood or maybe stones. I'm going to get rid of this background and put in the stones, and that's nice. And if we wanted to, we could blur this a little bit or play with the color grading or something like that. Those are nice ways to fill a background. Or we could fill it with another less abstract image, say this photograph of Mount Rainier. And this leads us into another way of dealing with stills, which is called collage. And I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes. But for the time being, let's consider yet another option, which is to resize this image in order to fill the space. So I'm going to increase the scale of it and reframe. And now it fills the space, but of course we can't see the whole photograph, and maybe we want to see the whole photograph. So a very common technique that's used especially with portraits like this is to do some photomation. So what we would do is make a starting point here on the timeline, and then we would start not on the face, but down on the lower part of the photograph and make a keyframe for position, then move the playhead forward, and then reframe for the face. And let's take a look at that. You've probably seen this in many, many documentaries, and it's a very nice way to introduce a new character to a piece and show the whole photograph, but fill the frame. And this is just one of many, many types of photomation, of course, that you can use. And this is what we call the Ken Burns effect sometimes. Ken Burns didn't invent it, but he made it famous. Of all the things you can do with still photographs in documentary films, photomation is probably the most useful and popular effect. If you're not already familiar with it, here is a brief introduction. So here's a beautiful photograph by Edward Curtis of dancers from the Kwakwaka'wakw tribe. I'm going to put that onto the timeline and extend the clip out a little bit. And then the first thing to do is scale it up so that it fills the frame. We go over here to the source window and go to the Effect Controls tab, where we have controllers for position and scale. So first I'm going to move the playhead forward a little ways on the timeline so we have a little pause at the beginning. And then I'm going to go here to the right of the word scale. You see this blue number, it's at 100% right now. I'm going to mouse over that and drag to the right to make the image fill the frame. And then I want to slide the photo down a little bit. So here are the position controllers. This is for horizontal position. This is for vertical position. So I mouse over the vertical position and drag right or left to move the image up or down. And now I'm going to start a move where I'm going to zoom in on one of the dancers. And to do that, I need to use something called keyframes. To make a keyframe, I go to these little things that look like stopwatches. And these are keyframe buttons. I'm going to click here in position and in scale. And these two little diamonds appear here in this area, which is called the mini timeline. What is a keyframe? Well, it's sort of like a milepost. It indicates a position both in time and in the parameters of a clip, such as position, scale, rotation, and so on. It's saying that at this point in time, these are the properties of the clip. And now we're going to change those properties and our position in time. First, I move the playhead forward a bit and then zoom in on this dancer on the right. So I'm going to drag over this number to zoom in, and then I have to adjust the position. I can do that in two ways. I could drag these numbers, or I can double click inside of the image and see this path appears for what I just did, and then grab somewhere else other than this blue target or this blue line, somewhere else, and just drag the image over to where I want to end up. And if you look over here, two new keyframes have automatically appeared in the mini timeline. Anytime you change both your position on the timeline and these numbers, Premiere automatically makes new keyframes. Let's look at what that did. So we have a pause and then a zoom in. And if I feel that happened a little too fast, all I have to do is drag over these two keyframes, drag them to the right, and when we play it now, it happens slower. The next move is going to be to pan over to the other dancer. But first, I want a little pause so the audience can look at this beautiful mask. So I need to make duplicate keyframes to tell Premiere from here to here, I want the position and scale to remain the same. So to make duplicate keyframes, you don't click these again because that will erase keyframes. Instead, there's other buttons over here. These will add duplicate keyframes. Now I will move my playhead forward, and then I'm going to double click in here and drag over to the other dancer. And just for good measure, I'm going to also make a keyframe here for scale, because in a moment I'm going to be changing that scale again. Let's look at what we've done. Zooming in, pausing, and panning over. Good. Now I want another pause. That seems like a good spot. So I'm adding another keyframe, and then I'm going to move the playhead forward. And now my idea is we're going to zoom in further, but we're going to rotate this a little bit. So actually I have to go back here and make a rotation keyframe. So to move between keyframes, you have these little triangles here. I'm going to click on that, and that takes me precisely back to this keyframe because I forgot that I need to make a rotation keyframe now. So here's a brand new keyframe next to rotation. Then I'm moving my playhead forward, zoom in some more on the mask. I'm going to reframe a little bit, and I'm also going to change this rotation number, and I think that's going to be an interesting effect. Now I have to slide this down. There we go. And let's take a look at that effect. Zooming in, pausing, panning across, pausing, and then rotating in. Isn't that nice? Now, if we want more gradual movements, we can do what's called ease in and ease out. I'm just going to do it on the last keyframes here. I'm going to highlight them and right click and go ease in. And that means we're going to move easily into this final keyframe. And let's make these ease out. Highlighting these, and temporal interpolation, ease out. You notice how the symbol changed to this hourglass shape. You see how it accelerates and decelerates. Another exciting thing you can do with photomation is combine several images on the screen at once and then move them around against either a still image or against video, as I did here for the Seattle Iranian Festival to show off several years' worth of their beautiful festival posters. Putting multiple still images on screen at the same time is a great way to illustrate relationships. Here on the right, the photographer Edward Curtis. On the left, Princess Angeline, one of the first Native Americans he photographed. And here, I bring one of Curtis's cameras into a montage of pictures he took over the years. I'm trying to emphasize the relationship between Curtis's camera, the people and the tribes that he photographed, and finally the photographer himself as we zoom in to a close-up of his face. You can also create collages that look almost like still lifes by putting together photographs with images of artifacts like the watch and the glasses here. And these are not actual objects that I put on a table and photographed. They're images of artifacts that I gathered from different sources, assembled in Photoshop, and then used the Ken Burns effect to animate them in Premiere. The most intricate collage I ever created was in the opening of a program for the Port of Seattle. Here you see artifacts and photos all composited in Photoshop, and then we zoom in on one of the photographs, and then up come the main titles of the program. And then after that, we bridge past and present by bringing in video from today underneath a photograph from about 100 years ago. I want to show you how relatively easy it is to create an animated collage in Premiere. Here I have put several photographs on top of a background of wood, and I've just stacked them up on the timeline. And it's nice, but I think it's too neat and tidy. So I'm going to go mess them up by changing their scale and rotation and overlapping them so it ends up looking like maybe somebody just tossed them on a tabletop. Now, to increase the illusion that these are lying on top of each other, I'm going to add little shadows. So I'm going to select one of the clips and then go to Effects, Video Effects, and go to Perspective and double click on Drop Shadow. And this adds a shadow to this picture, but I can't see it yet because I have to adjust a few things. I'm going to increase the distance. Now we see that shadow creeping out from under the photo. And then I have to soften the edges. There we go. And now if I like that shadow, I can just copy and paste it onto the other photographs. Well, this collage looks very nice now, but I think it would be more exciting if we could add some movement to it. In order to do that, we need to select all of the clips, right-click, and go to Nest. And click OK here, and that kind of flattens everything into a single clip that we can add effects to, and all the clips will work together. So we could just use the Ken Burns effect and zoom in on part of this or travel across it, but I want to simulate a 3D move. And to do that, I'm going to go to the effects, and in the perspective bin, there's one called Basic 3D. I'm double clicking on that. And now we have some controls for swivel and tilt. Let's make a keyframe for tilt, also for scale, and also for position. And now I'm going to move the playhead forward a bit. And let's move this number next to tilt. Let's see what it does. Well, it does exactly what it says. It tilts the whole image. So now it looks like we're looking across a table that we're sitting at, and there's the photos. But of course, all this black area appears, and we probably don't want that. So I'm going to increase the scale and the position so that we don't see that black anymore. And to make it more elegant, let's add ease out and ease in to these keyframes. And let's take a look at that. Yeah, it's like we're moving right down on that table. Okay, and now let's do another move. So now let's make duplicate keyframes. And now I'm also going to make a keyframe here where it says swivel. And then move the playhead forward, and let's see what swivel does. Oh, look at that. We're rotating that to the side, and then we do have to increase the scale to cut out the black. Let's see what that does. There we go. And then turning to the side. Nice. Now, I talked earlier about the idea of bridging the past and the present, and you can do a lot of fun things when you have an old photo of a particular location and you can shoot video at that same location and then match them up. For example, here is a bank in Ballard and the president of that bank in 1909, and then we go to the same bank in 2009 with a historian walking toward the bank and talking about it. Here's the same historian at the University of Washington fountain, and then a photograph of that same fountain in 1909 during Seattle's first World's Fair. Here we see people walking on the UW campus, and then I bring in buildings that were in the same location 100 years earlier. One of my favorite sequences like this is from a biography I did of my father, Sam Raymond. Here he is walking past the house where he grew up, and then I freeze the video, and then I superimpose a photograph of my father as a little boy sitting on that exact same doorstep 70 years earlier. And then we go up to the door, I open the door, and here are my grandparents hanging out in the living room in the 1930s. So as you can see, you can create some nice then and now type sequences by combining old photographs with current day video. The very last topic I want to introduce here is an exciting technique called parallax animation, in which we take a still photo into Photoshop and separate it into several different layers. We can then bring these layers into Premiere and animate them separately to change their scale and position and movement. The end result simulates a camera moving through a 3D environment. This is a somewhat complicated process, so I have created a separate tutorial for parallax animation, which I've linked at the end of this video. In the meantime, I hope this tutorial has given you some good ideas and inspirations toward creative ways to use still images in documentaries and nonfiction films.